We're here at, this morning we're here at Marrakesh Country Club at Katherine Hayes' beautiful home. We're going to talk to Katherine this morning. She was a nurse in World War II, spent 3 years in Europe, in North Africa and Italy with Patton's outfit, among others. So we're going to talk to her today. Nice to have you allow us to be in your home, Katherine.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I hope I remember that far back.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Okay, let's start then. When you guys were getting ready to get on the Florence Nightingale, where was that now?
That was at Fort Dix. We left from Fort Dix to New Jersey, to the port of debarkation. And I think there had to be, I can visualize what I call the shed or the dock. I know there had to be 10,000 people in there, 10,000 troops. There had to be 10,000. I think there were, actually. And our hospital was divided on 3 different ships, the personnel on of the hospital on 3 different ships. It happened that the ship I was on was called the Florence Nightingale. We didn't know it was called the Florence Nightingale until we boarded the ship, because of course that wasn't on our orders, it was a code. So when we got to the where we were supposed to go, directed, we saw docked what looked like and was an old tanker. And so when I walked up with the orders, my orders and the orders for the 36 nurses who were to be on that ship, the officer said, "No way, we have no provisions for women on this ship." He was so surprised. He said, "We can't take any women, we have no facilities for women." But then after he called around or went around or did something, he said, "Okay, come on." And of course we had all our worldly belongings on our back and carrying a suitcase. We were allowed to carry a suitcase in our musette bag. And so we got on board, and first thing we were greeted with was a ladder down about, I suppose 10 feet. I thought it looked like 50 feet. So we climbed down the ladder, all 36 of us, and he had put us, I suppose it was quarters for some of the troops, but they pushed them around somewhere else. And there were 12 of us in each little cubicle under the pipes. We were down in the hold. I suppose the space was maybe 6 by 10 at the most, 6 by 8 maybe. So we were in tiers of 3 bunks. There was no way that more than 3 people could get out of the bunks and stand in this space. We were in the middle. And it was December of '42, and the waters were rough. We didn't know where we were going. Turned out we were going to Africa, and we were the first convoy to go through the Straits of Gibraltar. I don't know how many ships were in the convoy. It seemed to me someone said 300. That seems like an awful lot of ships, but all I can recall are the number of troops that were in that when we departed. It was a rough journey. It was 21 days, and we were really in the submarine waters. You know, December of '42, off the coast of New York. You can visualize when we knew that.
Torpedo Alley.
It was Torpedo Alley, right. So we were nervous, but I was personally so seasick, I didn't care whether we were torpedoed or not. I was seasick the whole 21 days because it was so rough, and the odors and the cramped quarters. And I think it was Christmas Eve, as a matter of fact. About 3 o'clock in the morning, the drill went off. Of course, we'd had a lot of drills on the way to abandon ship.
Yeah, when I think When you first started out, didn't the ship break down or something?
Well, oh yes. It had broken down twice before Christmas Eve because we left on, I can't remember exactly when, December the 2nd or 1st or something like that. First thing that happened, old Flossie Nightingale broke down and the convoy left us. Well, we were probably 200 miles out then, 250. Now, we really were in Torpedo Alley, and we were scared. We were really scared. There was other medical officers on board with us, not all of them, and some of our enlisted men. So they were all split up, you see, in 3 different ships. We didn't know where they were. We knew they were in the convoy.
How many of your staff were on the Florence Nightingale?
I would suppose maybe 15 doctors and a couple hundred enlisted men, 36 nurses. The others were on the other 2 ships. As I said, we didn't know which ships they were on. Yes, Flossie broke down, and the convoy left us. Now, the first time they left a destroyer with us to protect us as much as possible. Then we went another maybe 500 miles, and Flossie broke down again. That time, they didn't bother with the destroyer. They just left us. I don't know whether they thought we were in safer waters or not. So we sat, and Flossie was fixed up, and we putzed along, and finally caught up with the convoy. And then it was Christmas Eve, or 2 or 3 days before. I'm not exactly sure of this. Days didn't really mean very much. At 3 a.m., we'd had lots of drills, as you know, to abandon ship. But this was a drill to abandon ship. So we thought, oh dear, 3 a.m., abandon ship. We had to sleep in our clothes. We never could take our clothes off. We did for a few minutes to bathe out of wherever we could, out of the helmet. And so I thought, the nurses in my particular 12-unit space.
Before the alarm went, had you heard any noise or anything like that?
No noise. If we did, I do not recall a noise. Anyway, I thought, abandoned ship, this is funny because the crew is racing up and down the corridor and yelling, we've been hit, we've been hit. So, of course, I knew mighty well then we had been hit and we are going to have to abandon ship. So, we couldn't all get out of our bunk at the same time, but we were in our overcoats, and we had our life belt around us. It was one of those rubber things around your middle that you inflated. Well, I was so scared. Here I was the chief nurse. I was supposed to be calm. I was so frightened. I shook so hard I couldn't get the valve, as I call it, open, but I finally did. And it turned out, and we finally, we got out in the corridor as soon as we hit the floor so that the rest of the girls could get out and walk out. We had been hit. We'd been hit by a sister ship because apparently there was a torpedo or an alarm in the convoy, and they were zigging and zagging all the way across the Atlantic anyway. So poor old Flossie didn't zig or didn't zag when she was supposed to, and so we were rammed in the side, in the bow, I guess it was. Yes. 3 of our enlisted men were killed. And we were up on deck, ready to get into lifeboats, whatever, there weren't enough lifeboats for us, but we were all scared, but we, I guess, expected something like that to happen. So here it is. We haven't even gotten into the war, and we're going to never get there. But the convoy went off and left us, and we limped all the way in then to Oran, Africa on our own. And we thought as soon as we saw land, we were safe. And the following day, after we arrived at our hospital area, we were watching a convoy. We were right on the Mediterranean Sea, way up on a cliff. We were watching a convoy come in. And just then, there was the most tremendous explosion, and the whole sky was white smoke. It was an ammunition ship that had been hit by a torpedo right there going into the harbor. And then the day before, we were all out on deck thinking, oh, we've arrived safely. Well, it wasn't safe. So anyway, we got there. Now, you want to know something?
Oh, okay.
Care, we're only beginning. Well, when we got to Iran, the officers were told they had to march to the hospital area, Ain al-Turk. Ain al-Turk was 8 miles, I think, from Oran Harbor. Now that was a big harbor, and it was bombed after that most every night. Now we were 8 miles away, however, but we could hear, and didn't feel we were safe because we were right on the Mediterranean Sea. The nurses were loaded on trucks, and so we trucked our way into Ain al-Turk along, if anybody knows the Amalfi Drive, this was far worse than the Amalfi Drive, around the mountains, and it had been bombed, the road, and so there were areas where you look down like 500 feet and 2 inches, and the truck and we would have been down there. But we got to Ain al-Turk. By this time it's dark.
How many nurses altogether were with you then?
Well, we had 120 then, but we had physical therapists and dietitians and occupational therapists and Red Cross. I think there are about 135 women. So we got there in the dark. And it turned out, well, we all expected, Northwestern University, we would have a big building all ready for us, all equipped. All we had to do was walk in and start taking care of patients. Doesn't work that way in war. So Ain al-Turk, it turned out, was a Riviera resort for the French. Come over from France to vacation on the Mediterranean. And there were, I think, 105 villas that we were to occupy on 3 levels, the sea level and the middle road and the upper road, as we called it. 105 villas. Well, that night when we got there, again, no arrangements made for any sleeping. You just don't do that in war. So we all piled into certain villas that they had the keys for, and we all slept on the floor and the bathrooms and wherever we could find space to house that many women. And the next morning when we awakened, we were shocked to find out, well, where's the hospital? Where is the hospital? And then someone said this is the hospital. You're going to set up in these 105 villas. The villas were filled with furniture, and so all of this had to be stored in the basement or some warehouse, all labeled carefully, because the French were very upset that the Americans were going to take over their villas. And their villas were very attractive from the outside because of all the flowers and orange trees, and we thought we were in heaven off of that awful Atlantic. Well, we soon found out the inside of the villas didn't look like the outside. They were, the walls were cracked and the tiles were cracked, and the furniture, a lot of it was bad, and we had to inventory all of the cracks and the scratches and whatnot. And we had nothing to clean with. We had to get these little villas cleaned up to put patients in. So the nurses went to their foot lockers and pulled out underwear and things that they brought over for the duration. And then we made brooms out of palms and sticks. And anyway, bless their hearts, they pitched in there with the enlisted men and cleaned up all these villas. Our equipment didn't come for several days. And like MASH, we had officers go down to the dock every day to find out which ship or if another convoy was coming in with our equipment. And it turned out, though, that the 21st General Hospital had come in several weeks or days after we had. somehow they got down there first, or they got all our equipment. So the feud began right then and there with that hospital, which went 80 miles down in the desert, and we were on the coast of Oran. Now, they were mad at us because they thought our location was better than theirs anyway. So they stole our equipment. They took it off the dock as fast as they could take it, and down we went. Well, we finally got enough equipment to get set up. And the villas, now we had a couple chateaus. And I recall 2 chateaus, we could put as many as 60 to 80 patients in them. Beautiful big old chateaus. But the other little villas, we couldn't put more than 10 or 15 cots in. So, to take care of 2,000 patients, we had miles of the upper road, middle road, lower road. We had no telephones, so everything had to be communicated on heel and toe. And the hill, we called it Coronary Hill, to climb from the bottom up to the top. We all lost. I suppose the average weight loss the first 3 months or 6 months was at least 25 pounds, at least, because we only ate twice a day, and we had no place to eat till a Quonset hut was finally built. But otherwise, there was no place to eat. So we went up in a little area where there was a lot of old scrub trees. I don't know what you call them. And it was just a park, they called it, or we called it, with a lot of shrubbery around. African shrubbery. And it started to rain. It started to rain 5 days after we got there. It rained continuously, downpour day and night, as it can do in the desert, for at least 30 days. We had no raincoats. We had our wool overcoat. Now, Africa sounds like, oh, it'd be warm and balmy like Hawaii. No, it's like Palm Desert in the wintertime. The days may be sunny, except it was raining. But the nights are damp and cold. Oh, those villas were cold. They were cold. The walls were wet. We slept on cots with...
Did you sleep in the villas or in tents?
In the villas. No, we had villas then. I think the nurses were in about, 6 villas. Oh, we were jammed tight on cots. No mattress. No. Just we were issued 2 blankets. We put 1 blanket under us because it was so cold and damp, and 1 over us. So we donned everything we possibly could find in our footlocker to wear to bed. We didn't undress to go to bed. We dressed to go to bed.
And you said you ate twice a day. What did you usually have to eat?
We never had coffee. We had tea. We had British rations. So in the morning, we ate at 10 o'clock in the morning and stood in line in the rain because, boy, everybody was there who could get there at 10 o'clock. We were so hungry. God, we were hungry. For breakfast, we had our little cup of tea and about 3 hardtack biscuits. And that was it. That was morning. In the afternoon, we had oxtail soup. Now, most of it was the bones of the tail of the ox and the grease. So there you would stand in the rain waiting, and you'd get this cupful out of a barrel, plopped in our mess kit. And then we walked a little farther, and we got 3 cigarettes and a little piece of chocolate. That was big. That was big meal. And so that was our evening supper. About 4 o'clock we started. Of course, the line was so long. But the rain came down so hard. I'm not exaggerating. Pouring into this mess kit. And all this, the grease began to form on the top. But, that grease tasted good. I mean, we were so hungry. And then at nighttime, I can recall the girls would be in the villa I lived in, and they were out on the porch, or whatever, I call it a porch, I'm Midwestern. and the cots were just jammed tight. And no lights, you see. We had no lights when it got dark. So you would hear these girls would say, geez, wouldn't a steak taste good? And then somebody else would say, oh, I'd love a big salad. And all they did was talk. And then you'd hear somebody say, shut up. So that was the way it was.
When did you start getting patients?
Well, we had patients within 2 weeks. And you
And
see,
this was when Rommel and it was the Americans had just
Patton was still there, you see, and we were getting casualties in from the Algiers area, and we were, I think, maybe 250 miles. So there were evacuation hospitals up close that did what they really first aid type of thing. And then we would get them if they needed what I call more long-term cases.
And they usually would be, once they were well enough, would be evacuated back home. They usually didn't go back
On the
into the
big
lines.
white boat, on the big white boat. Oh, they soon learned to say, nurse, doctor, am I going to go on the big white boat? Because many of them were sent back to the duty, down to the front.
Right.
Oh, yes. But a general hospital usually takes care of the longer term and more, well, not the more severe casualties, because they're handled right up at the front, and then we get them for even secondary closures. You know, they don't even close all the wounds. Then they send them back to the general hospitals. You see, there's the VAC hospital, or the MASH type hospital, and then from there there's usually a station hospital in intermediate, and then comes the general hospital.
And did you just take care of American casualties, or did you have other?
We had only American casualties in Africa, but when we got over to Naples, we had Turkish, we had Italians, we had Germans. Yeah, some
Did
of them.
you?
Yeah, we had Germans over in Italy. And they were all terrified, you know, just terrified because of the way they treated the Americans if they were captured. And when they came into the hospital, they were wide-eyed and just afraid we would decapitate them and kill them. And it's interesting to see how they finally, when they found out the kindness, they were treated exactly like the American soldiers, exactly, with very care and compassion as much as you had time, and they became very helpful too. Then they would try to help every other. They'd help them, their own soldiers, you know, by helping, turning them in bed and holding water for them to drink and shaving them and.
Take some of the things that the nurses would have to do if you had time.
Well, the enlisted men usually did things like that because the nurses, there was a nurse from Passavant Hospital, well, we had 2 or 3 from Passavant Hospital, the same hospital I graduated from, which is it was known as the Gold Coast Hospital in Chicago. And so we had taken care of, well, 4 patients, you know, if you were assigned 4 patients, that was a heavy load. Well, of course, the nurse did everything in those days. And this girl from Passavant said to me, I can't believe it. She was the head nurse of one of the orthopedic ward. And she said, you know, I had another nurse with me, or 2 on the ward, and I'd say in the morning, you take beds 1 to 62. And she said, can you imagine Passavant saying you take beds 1 to 62, and they're all bed patients, and they're all acutely ill. Yeah. Well, that's the way it was, you know, you had to do that. And the enlisted men then did the nurse did a lot of the medications and the blood transfusions and changing the major dressings, and she was just busy as she could be. And the enlisted men did much of the patients bathed each other. Those who could hobble, even when they had a crutch under one arm, they'd be bathing another patient. It was remarkable to see the spirit of how they would take care of each other and how they tried so hard to help.
You say Patton was in the area. Did he come to the hospital to see the boys or anything? Do you recall seeing him?
No, yes, I recall seeing him. Yes, indeed, I do. But
Where did you see him?
he did come to the hospital to visit some of the patients. And as you know, he slapped a patient. That was the end of his career over there. Really, it was. Slapped a patient in an evacuation hospital. And this patient is well known, was a psychiatric case. And he was emotionally unfit for duty. And he cried, and he had had some horrible experiences up at the front line. And Patton made his rounds through this evacuation hospital and walked up to him and said, "You look pretty healthy, you know. You better get up and get back to the front lines where you belong." And the kid started to cry. And he slapped him. And as you know, you've heard him say, "I wished I'd kissed the son of a bitch." Because it really ruined
I think in the long run it did.
It did. And I think rightly so. He was a tough man. Tough. And the soldiers really didn't care much for him, as you know. Well, for example, some of these people, I think Willie, I've forgotten those cartoons that modeled
Willie and Joe.
Willie and Joe. Patton was mad about this in the Stars and Stripes. Had a picture of Willie and Joe in the Stars and Stripes, and he's doing so-called guard duty in the city, which they had to do, you know, like an Oran. And Patton came along and showed it to Patton with his helmet on and said, "Soldier, your jacket's unbuttoned. Button it." And the soldier said, "Sir, I don't have a button. It was shot off." I think I still have that cartoon.
Yeah. Did you have any personal dealings with him yourself?
No, I didn't. Met him, had to salute him when he was out in the hospital. Of course, I was with the commanding officer. Saluted, that's all. Made rounds, said nothing.
So how long were you there in North Africa then?
1 year. 1 year to the day almost, I think. 1 year. Then we evacuated all the patients. Either they went back to the States or they went back to duty. Or transferred to another hospital that was not to move as soon as we were. Then we went to Italy.
By this time then, Rommel had been...
Was finished. Done.
So.
We had, some bad casualties over it. We had bad casualties. We had a neurosurgical service. Long-term neurosurgical. And when I say long-term, they were paralyzed from bullets, you know, in their head or their spine. And those patients had to, you know, it was terribly hard to take care of patients in those villas. For example, we couldn't get a litter through that neurosurgical, those villas. They had to come through the window, and I can still see this high-powered neurosurgeon from Northwestern University on his knees on a cot near the window, an enlisted man at one end, and he was at the other trying to get a patient littered into the villa. That was hard work to take care of those patients under those facilities. One nurse would have as many as 5 villas. And she'd have to walk, you see. The 5 villas may be a space of at least a block to run in and out. That was bad. And I can remember one night in Africa we had a tornado, a hurricane, not a tornado, hurricane, because it rained all night. We had tents, and a lot of those little terraces on the villas had tarps over them and down to close them in for the winter. They were torn off, and the rain came down, and the windows blew in, and the mops and the brooms were flying through the air, and this poor girl in her helmet, the night nurse, in her helmet. By that time, they issued us men's raincoats. would be with a lantern, buffeted her way or a flashlight up and down to these 5 villas with an enlisted man hanging on to her and she hanging on to the enlisted man. That was a terrible night, you know, to take care of patients. But sell again.
So you'd been there a year, but you guys didn't get to come home.
Oh no, we had another 2 years ahead of us. Spent 3 Christmases overseas, and as I have said, the 3 cold winters. We were so cold all winter long. We were cold and had no heat at all. Absolutely no heat, no hot water. Outside latrines.
How did you get from North Africa then over to Naples?
On a hospital ship. And we over some of the doctors, enlisted men, went over ahead of us, and I don't know what kind of a ship they were on. And to get the personnel, let's see, it'd be over 600, 300 enlisted men, and all of the doctors and nurses, and all of our equipment packed up for a 2,000 bed hospital is no easy job. Now that is a task. But we moved it all and got all the personnel over there and found out they didn't have a hospital an area big enough for us to be set up. And most of the hospitals, they took over the whole old fairgrounds in Naples. And so we were told that as soon as Rome was taken, we were to move to Rome. We'd be the first hospital up in that area. So our personnel went out on detached service to all the other hospitals. And of course those people had just arrived. And they didn't know how to, as far as we were concerned, they didn't know how to set up a hospital over there.
You were the veterans.
Well, yes, we'd had a whole year of experience of improvising, using tin cans for dressing containers and scrounging around and getting old pieces of wood, and we knew how to do it, and they didn't. Now this is a fact, because we didn't know how right at first either. And so we had many, the commanding officer had many, and I was chief nurse. I didn't go out and detach. Yes, I was on detached service with a station hospital there. And we had lots of letters of commendation of how great it was to have our personnel pitch in and help and show them how. And those hospitals were full because that was a mean, dreadful war in Italy. And no one really realized it unless they were there, because all of the publicity went to D-Day and preparation for Europe and what was happening over in there. And nothing was ever hardly publicized or broadcast on what was going on in Italy. And it was murderous over there. And that terrain is bad. And we had thousands of terrible casualties. But nobody paid any attention.
Were the Germans bombing Naples while you were there?
Every night, because see, that's a harbor. That was where all the equipment was coming in for all of our troops in Italy. So they bombed every night. And we were right, well, the fairgrounds was right near the harbor. And what did we do when they bombed every night? Well, we stayed right where we were, because you can't leave patients. You don't run off to a bomb shelter and leave your patients. So you just listen to the rubble come down around you and held your hand up over your head like, I hope it, it doesn't hit me, and that's it. You just finally steeled yourself, but you never got used to it. You never said, I can remember patients saying, "Nurse, are you scared?" Because, we're scared. And you'd hear the nurses and you'd hear me say, "I'm petrified." And you are. You never get over that. Never. I can still almost hear it. So it was bad in Naples. It was really bad. And we were near the Abbey. You see, the Abbey was up at Caserta, and the Abbey's not too far from it. And everybody knows how terribly that Abbey was bombed. And I found out
The casino?
the casino. Well,
Monte Casino?
yes,
Yeah.
and then you know the Abbey
Right.
up on the hill.
Mhm.
It turns out that and Americans bombed it because the Germans were there, and you know the monks or whoever were protecting them. Or I suppose they had a gun, I don't know, at their head and said, listen,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
our refuge.
Yeah.
And then they would report what was going on in all of these hills. So
Yes,
that was why that Abbey was bombed right to the ground to get rid of the
Observation posts, yeah. And that wasn't very far from...
Oh, no.
Naples,
No, I don't know, can't remember exactly, but not very far.
yeah. Yeah, you had said at one time, and I can't remember exactly where it was that you were. I don't know if it was at Naples or if it was where you went after Rome, where the Germans got within like 3 miles of you guys.
Oh, that was up in Leghorn,
Oh, okay.
near Florence.
Right.
They were. Now, we were told one night, and we had about 2,000 patients. And talk about the night that we were scrambling around on board ship, you know, because we were going to be sink and had to go overboard. That night, everybody in that hospital was scurrying around too, scared to death because the word had come, the Germans are 3 miles up the road or about that, and we were going to be all taken prisoners. So we just had to, you know, quick do what we thought you should do before we were captured. Well, they would have had to capture the whole hospital, but then that's all right. They could have come in and shot us all too, you know, or half of us, or tortured us. We didn't know what would happen. But fortunately, and I wish I could remember the details of which unit saved our lives. And that's been written up, and I really ought to get into that so I could give them credit.
Yeah,
And they've been given credit, and it was written up not too long ago, I think in the Desert Sun, maybe, in the Desert Sun on Memorial Day,
Oh, yeah?
just recently. I think it was Memorial Day,
Oh.
where some of the soldiers recalled, and who live here in this area, who were in the platoon that really stopped the Germans.
Yeah, well maybe we can...
Yeah,
Follow
research
up on
that
that.
a little
I'd like
bit.
to do
I
that,
really,
yeah.
I wish I knew.
Yeah, well,
And I should know, because we were very relieved when we found out the next day that they'd been pushed back. So that was well, I don't know what more I can tell you about the experiences.
Well, okay, next, first, how long were you at Naples then?
6 months.
6 months. And then you went to Rome.
For 6 months. Now that was the most intensive workload that we had in the whole 3 years. We had 3,000 patients, and we acted as an evacuation hospital. We were just behind the front lines there. So we were a vac hospital, we were a station hospital, and we were a general hospital. We would get 400 patients in a day. So that meant we had to get 400 patients back to the rear, back to Naples or wherever the hospitals might be the closest, to make room for all of these casualties that were coming in right from the front. So that is when we had a workload that was almost impossible to take care of, but we did.
When you left Naples, did you get up there on trucks? Did you go up to Rome on trucks, and how?
From Naples, we went in LSTs, landing craft, LCTs, landing craft infantry,
LCI?
LCIs,
Oh, okay. From Naples.
LCIs.
Oh, you went up to the...
And then we
the
went up
port.
to Anzio.
Oh, to Anzio.
Anzio. And then from Anzio, well, we had trucks meet us, and we went by truck to Rome. And again, we were so excited because we were about 6 miles outside of Rome. We're near the front. And we saw this huge building. Oh my land, we thought, isn't that wonderful? We have a building to put patients in, and we won't have them scattered all over 3 or 4 miles. And that building had been occupied by the Germans. It was filled with wires and steel, and I don't know what it was. It was just filled with it was sort of a mill type of place. That was a job to clean up and get ready for patients. That was a big job. The nurses did live in a building there. We had a building, but the German officers had occupied it, and it was in pretty bad shape, and they had left everything mined. The building, the hospital, this big building where the patients were to be, it was filled with mines, so the engineers had to come in and do that. We were terrified of mines all the time in our nurses' quarters for fear that was all mine, because they knew that we were coming and they had to be pushed back. So that's where we set up. And that was our most intensive, I would say, work period. We didn't have any hours of duty. We just worked around the clock till we dropped.
And it was 5 stories?
5 stories, no elevators, of course. And all these patients, as I said, 400 patients in, 400 out, all have to be littered up and down stairs. The operating room was on the 2nd floor, and every nurse was working to capacity. And my job as chief nurse was to see that all the wards were covered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And every nurse was just utilized to the maximum. As a chief nurse, I thought, well, I've got to do something. I can't just have these girls work as hard as they're working and have me just walk around and say, how are you doing? So I thought, well, the job that I can do best is to help with the anesthetized patients following surgery, because they had to be littered back to their ward. Now, some of them had to go up 3 flights of stairs, unconscious, and so I, as a professional nurse, accompanied as many as I could. I couldn't go every one of them, but I kept going all day long with them, and until I almost dropped, and going up and down stairs. And I can remember one evening when I thought I couldn't make another step, let alone a whole stair. I just sat down on this step and held my head and thought, I can't do it. I cannot go on anymore. I just can't. And feeling very sorry for myself, terribly sorry for myself. And then I thought, just go up on such and such a ward where we had our worst casualties of gunshot wounds. I mean, they were just, amputees, legs and arms and faces and eyes. And I walked through there. That straightened me out. I just thought, you're feeling sorry. You're just tired, that's all. You're just tired. Look at those kids. They're mutilated for their whole life. Some of them are going to die. So, I mean, it was tough. It was tough.
You had mentioned one of your nurses was sitting next to a boy that was going to be dying pretty soon.
Oh yes, that was so tragic. Well, he was young, very young. I suppose maybe he was 22. He was married, but and newly married. But his wife had a baby while he was overseas, and he wanted to see that baby so bad, and his wife, of course. And so he was probably, we knew he was going to die that night or any hour. I had made arrangements to ask one of the nurses if she'd mind staying with this patient, because he was so terrified. And I did try to do that. Any patient that you knew was going to die within the next few hours, I always tried to let the nurses know that I would like to have them there with them and keep them as comfortable as possible and sedated and reassure them as much as possible. And this lad said to the nurse, "Oh, nurse, am I going to die?" And she said, "Oh, no, you're not going to die." Well, of course, she knew what he was. And then he said, "Nurse, please don't let me die. Don't let me die. I have a new baby at home. I haven't seen my baby. I've got to go home and see my baby, so don't let me die." And of course he was he went in and out of what do I want to say, consciousness, but he was irrational. So one minute he'd be home milking the cows. He was a farm boy. And then the next minute he knew what was happening. But he died. He died. And as this nurse said, I certainly went back up behind anything I could find, and I had a good cry. But she said, you know, I cried lots of times when patients died. Nurses, you know, somebody said, oh, well, she was a nurse during the war. When you hear foul language or you know, sort of hard-boiled talk. Oh, well, she's a nurse, so, you know, she wouldn't mind. You know, that irritates me. Nurses are not like that. They have feelings, and they're very compassionate. And I just get very upset when people think that nurses are hard-boiled. Let them die, you know, or I've seen lots of patients die. I never saw, all the time I was overseas, did I ever see nurses not be as compassionate as they could be. They never were cold or you know, not caring.
You had told me also, I think, about a boy who was blind, or at least he couldn't see.
Oh yes, that was an experience. We had a large psychiatric service over in Rome. Yes, this was in Rome, where we had over 3,000 patients. I suppose we must have had, I think we had 300 to 400 psychiatric patients. And these were patients who had witnessed some terrible scenes on the battlefield. And this lad came in. He was injured, but he was blind. He couldn't see. He actually could not see, because I think the ophthalmologist, and we did have ophthalmologists who did other work than I worked, but that was his specialty back in Chicago. He was able to determine that this lad actually was not seeing. But he could see no pathology in the eye, and no reason, no injury. So he said, I think this is hysteria, which proves what hysteria can do. So the psychiatrist decided to put him under sodium pentothal, use sodium pentothal on him to try and find out why he was blind or couldn't see. So he had sodium pentothal.
We think of sodium pentothal as the truth serum based on.
Yes, well, that's exactly. You know, the patient can still answer questions. He's not under. You ask him and you say, now, do you tell us about your experience, where you were hurt, where were your troops, or where were you? And he would answer those questions. They finally, you know, got down to, and what happened, you know, when such and such in a battle. And he relived his battle. He relived it. He began to scream about, oh, buddy so-and-so's gone, you know, they've blown his head off. And, you know, he kept going and screaming because he was in the battle. Relived every minute of it. And finally the doctor let him go through and said, okay, now you've been injured and now you've been sent back to a hospital, and talked to him. And then he said, now, you know, you're back in the hospital and you're safe and you can see. Now you can open your eyes and see, or, you know, you can see. And the kid said, I can see. I can see. And then, of course, he burst into tears and was hysterical because he could see. Mm-hmm. That was so dramatic. Incidentally, a tape wasn't that particular patient, but other tapes had been made of this sort of thing happening with patients during the war. And Ingrid Bergman had to play the actress had to play the part of either, I don't know what the part was, but she came to the Pentagon because she had heard, and you know, through the channels and arrangements, that she could see some of these films. And I was designated to go with her to the little theater in the Pentagon.
This was after the war?
After the war, when I was working in the Pentagon. And I went with her, and she saw one of these films and saw exactly how this patient reacted. Well,
I think that movie had Gregory Peck in it too. I remember seeing that movie.
She sat there with tears in her eyes when that film was finished, and she said, "Oh, if only I could act that well." She was so taken with the well, it wasn't acting, it was the real thing, but she wished that she could really act as well as what she saw. So that was done several times during the war, several times, not only for I remember this one lad particularly, because I was in the room. Now, as chief nurse, you couldn't be in the room every time one of these things were done.
Oh, so you actually witnessed that?
I witnessed that personally, so I know.
Yeah.
But it was done many times over on that, when we were in Rome, or on that service.
You had, I think you said, what was it, about 3 or 4 years ago, you went back to Rome, and it was quite different from the...
Yes, because when we were in Rome, there were no automobiles, no civilian cars on the road, not a civilian car. The only vehicle you saw on the streets of Rome might be a command car, it's military, or jeep, or a truck. So, and Rome was closed down. It was a ghost city. But all those magnificent buildings were there. And so, and all no shopping. You couldn't shop. All the shops were closed. And they had no gasoline. They had no, they couldn't drive. So I saw Rome like I suppose Rome was way, way back when. No cars, quiet. Going to St. Petersburg, we just walked in. There were no crowds out on the side, and no crowds inside. You may be the only person in St. Petersburg or in the Sistine Chapel. Remarkable. And then I've been back, and I just can't. Excuse me, my nose is running, and I need a Kleenex. Oh dear. Oh. Oh, I thought Rome was the most magnificent site and city that could ever exist in this world. But when I went back, I didn't think so, especially 2 years ago, where you stood in line and line and line and honking and...
I think you mentioned you got to have a private audience with Pope Pius XII while you were there?
I'm glad you remembered it was Pope Pius XII. I wouldn't have known. I knew it was a pope, period. Yes, one of the nurses in the unit was married, and in St. Peter's. And I don't know how she ever, through some contact she had, or the man she was marrying, or the soldier, there was all soldiers. I think we had 15 marriages in the unit during the war, in the 3 years. Boy meets girl.
Yeah, sure.
They were all soldiers. A couple of them were British soldiers. Anyway, she was married in St. Peter's, and I was invited to the wedding. And then whoever made the arrangements for her to be married there, and she had the white gown sent from home. She was all done up properly. Beautiful wedding.
Did you go to the wedding?
Oh, yes. And then the arrangements had been made that she could have a private audience with the Pope. Well, of course, she took me with her and her husband. So that was very interesting. We went up to his private quarters, and I kissed his ring. So I must have a special place somewhere up there. And it was nice.
Did you have any boyfriends in the 3 years you were over there?
Oh, how could you? No.
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 Okay.
I didn't. Yes, I did. Sure. I did. I had a nice doctor friend.
I think you had mentioned that, I think I heard that too, that Hitler had ordered Rome to be destroyed or blown up, and no, maybe.
No,
I
Rome
think
was
that was
always
it.
declared an open
Oh,
city.
always, that's right, it was.
It
Yeah.
was an open
That's
city. It
because
was
they
never
bombed it or
bombed. No. We didn't have to live in fear there. We had no fear at all because we were not bombed. We were not. The only thing is we had casualties right from the front. So we did see different types of cases there. But we were only there 6 months, and then we folded up again, had to pack all that equipment up and personnel and move them up the road to Leghorn, Livorno. It's called Livorno now, I guess. It's about, I can't think of how far it is from, maybe 20 miles, 15 miles from Florence.
Yeah.
Another port, though.
But you went on trucks to there from Rome?
Oh, no, nothing as simple as that. We went on trucks to a railroad station in Rome, and we had to go back to Naples to get to Leghorn. We were all day and all night and all day getting from Rome back down to Naples. All piled in what I call a cattle car. I mean a cattle car. It's just awful. You've seen these things they put the prisoners in and take them up to Siberia. Well, ours was like that. That was just awful. And we were supposed to get there in so many hours. We didn't have any food. We had nothing to eat. I guess we always carried our canteen. I guess we had a canteen of water apiece. That was it. Then when we got to Naples, they put us on trucks and then took us over to the port, and we went on, let's see, then we had to go by ship again up to Leghorn. I guess LSTs or LCIs or something. Always crowded, always packed in. I suppose there was more dissension. You know, the girls were wonderful taking care of patients, but, you know, they got a little testy when they were jammed in like cattle. And then your quarters are better than my quarters, and I slept on the floor for a week, and you only slept 3 days on the floor.
I think you had mentioned getting the girls, and I don't know which, it might have been in all those, when you had to get them loaded up into the trucks and things. It was usually in the middle of the night. And it was
I still talk about that. I still talk about it because when you try to get 4 women together to go out to lunch, you know, people think that's kind of a job to pick up 4. And I said, and get them all ready to get at the same time. I said, listen, you haven't lived until you've tried to get about 130 women at 3 a.m. in the morning, packed up, never to go back to where they were and have to leave it in fairly decent condition, and get them on trucks, because what would happen is that you'd get this first group on a truck, like 25 of them, or 15, I guess. I've forgotten how many on a truck, but it was jammed in. And then finally, when you got half of them loaded, the commanding officer would come along and say, "We're due to pull out. Where are those women?" Then I'd go back and start screaming, "Come on, you've got to go. You're holding up the whole convoy," which was a convoy. You'd finally get them all on the truck, and everybody's mad and screaming and irritable, and the commanding officer's on my back and I'm on their back. And then finally the first group you loaded, they'd say, Miss Baltz, I have to go to the bathroom. So I said, then they'd start getting off the truck to go to the bathroom. And then it'd start all over again. Oh, it was the worst time of my life, trying to get these girls moved. Oh, I never want to go through anything like that again. The war wasn't nothing compared to getting those women all together and off on the... Because, you know, you can't hold up a convoy because somebody has to go to the bathroom. But when they have to go to the bathroom, they have to go. Oh, it's terrible.
So what was Leghorn like then when you got there?
Same thing. I describe it in a little essay I wrote as we're facing our third... Just let it ring. I have an answering. We're facing our third winter overseas. Cold, hungry, and overworked. And another bunch of dirty, broken down buildings to clean up. And so, anyway, we were in a...
Was that your boyfriend from back overseas?
I don't have a boyfriend anymore.
No, I mean the boyfriend that you had.
He's
when you
dead.
Were,
Oh, well, you know, after my husband died, I shouldn't say this. I thought, well, I'll look up my old friend. Well, and then I was engaged when I went overseas. Anyway, I looked him up first, dead. Then I looked the second one up from over in African Italy, dead. So they're dead. That finished that. I thought that's enough of that. I'm not going to look up any. Doctors they either live a long time or they die young. There just seems to be not too much in between, if you notice. I don't know about this group, but I know that our doctors who are in our unit, you just cannot believe. I suppose 3/4 of those doctors died before they were 50 years old. Yeah. All of coronaries. So,
stressful times.
Yeah, I guess so. Now, we're back over cleaning up a bunch of broken down old buildings. And we were on the Tyrrhenian Sea then. And it was winter time, and I can see that old angry sea. We were right on the beach. And I suppose the sea might have been, I do things in blocks rather than yards, and I should know how many yards away. The buildings were right here, and the beach began here. That was so heavily mined. Heavily mined. Oh, we were forbidden to ever step our foot on any of that sand. And I was back a couple years ago and went back, and the old broken down buildings are broken down now, but they're not as bad as they were when we went there. Because they'd been bombed, you see, and there's a lot of rubble. And no windows broken. Slept on the floor again in the glass, and you know, we always arrived at nighttime. And you never could see, because none of these places ever had electricity or running water. And I remember the glass still crunching under our feet when we finally, with a flashlight, found someplace where we could put our bedding roll out and lie down. So we cleaned all those buildings up, and we got up to 2,000 patients again. No heat, no hot water, no, you know, none of the comforts. And by that time we were tired, you know, and we got a little, as I said, a little testy. A little grumpy about things. Still cared for the patients well, but our living conditions were always bad, very bad. And 3 years is a long time to live with none of the niceties or comforts, and we didn't have. Now, we slept on cots, you know. We got straw mattresses, though, once. They were so filled. And then everybody came running with all their bites from this, whatever the thing was in the straw. Fleas, I guess, I don't know.
And the nurses held up pretty well through all this time.
Physically, we always had about 10% of the nurses off duty ill. Ill mostly with upper respiratory. Because of the, they were cold and the food, your diet for 3 years was not good. And overworked, fatigue. And, they were exposed to bugs. As I said, mostly upper respiratory. Certainly during the winter, there were 10% off. And that hurt. And we did have provisions where we could put them. Every place we were set up, we had provisions where if we had to do nothing but hang a blanket up, to admit them to the hospital if they were that sick. Lots of diarrhea. Because they would sneak off and eat on the economy, as we'd say. Salads, everybody got hungry for some fresh salad, and then they developed amoebiasis, amoeba dysentery. That didn't take most of them off duty, but they had to take medication, and they didn't feel very well, including myself. I had the same problem, and I guess I did. I ate some of the stuff out in the market. You just get desperate.
I think you said that the biggest problem you had with them was keeping them in
uniform.
Regulation uniform.
Well, you know how women are. Why, they have a fit if they go to a party and see the same dress on someone else. They never want to wear the dress again. Well, you try. Now, I love uniform. I wish we had a uniform for Marrakesh for parties, and one for daytime, and one for winter and summer. And forget about the shopping for clothes. Well, I'm unusual. I like uniform. Most women do not like to wear the same thing every day. So now they would stay in their duty uniform, but you put them in what we call our Class A dress uniform. The minute they thought they were out of sight, and I wouldn't see them, they'd take off their tie, open up the collar, just do something. Pick a flower and pin it on them somewhere or on their hair, and take off their hat and go running around. And discard their jacket, anything, so they didn't, and wore a coat and shirt. And I was real cross about that. I was very fussy about uniform. Yes, it was very difficult to keep them in uniform. That was another problem.
I think you said that other hospitals, their head nurses would have probably more problems than you did, and sometimes they would send their quote, quote, problem nurses to you.
Yes, they did. They did, and I didn't like that very much. When I found out what was happening, when the commanding officer told me that he had, from the surgeon of the area, had informed him that, and he was to tell me, that if they had problems at other hospitals with nurses, and they did have problems. Some of these gals were defiant. They didn't want to be there. They wanted to go home. There were a certain number, like the men. You know how, who's the man in MASH who gets dressed up all the time?
Is it Klinger?
Klinger. Well, we had some clingers in the outfit. They would do anything to go home. And they knew if they became a bad disciplinary problem, they would be sent home. That was unfortunate. So you see, many of them would be difficult. And difficult well, they wouldn't conform to uniform. Forget it. And they would just tell the chief nurse what they thought. Or they couldn't get along with anybody. They wouldn't, their quarters, they were just difficult. So they'd send them to me. I didn't have any trouble with them. I really didn't. I don't know why. I think it was probably because I was the youngest chief nurse in the whole theater. And I was maybe more understanding. and we had an esprit de corps. We had a very loyal group of nurses. My nurses really liked me. You know, they liked me.
Well, you probably worked just as hard, if not harder.
Well,
than
I
they
did.
And
I
so
guess
I think
I
that's
worked,
a big part of it too.
and I could jump up and down off the trucks and do a lot of things that. And I was not rigid. I was not rigid. I was very understanding, and there was a give and a take all the time. And the girls knew they could always come to me with anything. I had a couple myself. I had 2 or 3 in my own unit, though, who didn't like me. You know, they didn't like because they didn't get promoted. It was mostly because they didn't get promoted. Now, that was another terrible problem I had, because the table of organization would call, say, for a lieutenant colonel for the chief nurse, and then a couple majors, and then maybe 5 captains, and then a mess of lieutenants, and then so many lieutenants. Well, when it came time to promote people from a second lieutenant to a first lieutenant, and you have 100 and some, that was very difficult to pick out.
And that was your job?
Yes, to pick out 5 people to be, or 5 to be promoted. And then captain. Now, captain was big rank for them then, you see, big rank. And I think I had only maybe 10 captains.
And what was your rank then?
My rank was a lieutenant colonel. I was promoted went in as a second lieutenant and raised my hand within, you know, up and down, and now a first lieutenant and now a captain. And so I was from a second lieutenant to a captain in a matter of 15 minutes because the table of organization called for a captain. And then finally it was changed to a major, and then it was changed when it was a 2,000-bed hospital, was changed to a lieutenant colonel. Back in 45, I was promoted in early 45. And so, anyway, you might know there'd be 2 or 3 girls who would be most unhappy that they didn't get to be captain when so-and-so was a captain. So I had a few problems that way myself. But that wasn't the reason they sent these girls to me.
You had mentioned that sometimes you would hop on flights on military planes to go to different places, and one you had mentioned about a B-25 experience.
Yes, a B-25. Well, I was going to a chief nurses conference. Now, there was a chief nurses conference in Naples, and I was in Leghorn. So I went over, but they made no get there however you can. Now, some commanding officers were real decent and sent the girls in a command car. Well, we were quite a distance from Florence to Naples. And my commanding officer said, I can't spare you. You can't go. Well, I said, I want to go. Anyway, he said, well, then you have to get there on your own. He knew then, he thought I wouldn't go, but I did. So I went out to the airport. I guess we had an enlisted man in the unit who was one of Al Capone's henchmen. Bruno. Now, I always went to Bruno. And I'd say, Bruno, is there any way you can get a jeep to take me to Florence? I want to take a plane, hop a plane down to Naples. Sure, Miss Ball, sure, Miss Ball. So Bruno always arranged everything for me. He was wonderful. Anyway, I went to Naples, went to the control tower of the military airfield.
To Florence, me?
In Florence. Yeah. And, you know, when you wanted to go anywhere, and the nurses did this every time they had a day off or 2 days off together, they'd go to the local airport, local military airport, and tap the boys on the back and say, where are you going? I'd like to go with you. No matter where it was, they'd go. Well, I did the same thing. So I tapped one of these well, I didn't know what he looked like when I tapped him on the back. But I knew he had a leather jacket on and his hat was cocked to one side, and I thought, well, he's a pilot. So he turned around and, gee, he was young. Oh, dear, he looked about 18. I said, where are you going? he said, I'm going to Naples. Oh, I said, that's where I want to go. I want to go to Naples. Think I can ride with you? And he said, oh, man, I don't think so, because, you know, I'm flying a B-25, and, you know, we're not supposed to take any passengers. And I said, we have no facility. I said, can't you put me somewhere? And he said, well, yeah. Oh. So I went with him out to the plane when the time came, and he had another, and then he went over and got another young kid, and the three of us walked out to the plane. And he said, no, you know, don't come right along, because I don't want anybody to see you. So anyway, he got me on the plane, and so I sat in a little jump seat in the back of the B-25. And he said, now you put on your parachute, and I put on the parachute, and then we started off. And we were over the Tyrrhenian Sea, and we hit, well, it was bad weather when we left. I should have never gone. Bad weather. So we got over the Tyrrhenian Sea, and oh, we were socked in. Oh, boy, you couldn't see the wing of the plane. Nothing. We were flying. So we flew, and we flew, and we flew, and I thought, oh, gee, we ought to be in Naples by now. So pretty soon I saw these two lads, and they were just fiddling with everything they could fiddle with on this plane, and it was rough, and I got sick. I walked through wet grass, and I got seasick. So with one eye open, I saw all this going on, and I said, pretty soon, one of them turned around and said, are you scared? Well, I said, yeah, I'm a little scared. What's the matter? Oh, he said, you know, we've got to fly instruments, and neither one of us have ever flown instruments before. So he said, you got your parachute on? I said, yeah. So pretty soon we flew and flew and flew, and he turned around and he said, we're going to have to ditch. I don't know whether we're over the ocean or where we are, but you're going to have to get off. You know, we're going to have to get out of this plane. We're going to crash because we're out of gas. We've been out of gas for 10 minutes. I thought, well, that was very frightening. I thought, oh, I don't know what to do with this parachute. Well, God helped us. Somewhere along the line, a patch of sky opened up, and we looked down, and we're in Naples, and we get to the Naples airport. I often wonder if those kids ever got home alive, because they were something else. Oh, I had lots of experiences hitchhiking. I really did. I did. I hitchhiked on a B-17. Then, of course, the B-25, and then the old C-27. What was that old workhorse?
47.
The C-47. They call it the old workhorse.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, lots of times I was on it. Oh, boy.
Tell me about when you came home, your flight home, and how you got to that hotel.
Well, that's pretty vivid. That experience you could never forget. Now, I might forget. I forgot what I had for breakfast this morning, but I'll tell you one thing you'll never forget coming home. My commanding officer received a telegram that I was to, when
was
we were
the war over then when you came
in
home?
Leghorn. The war was over. In Leghorn, that I was to report back to the Surgeon General's office in Washington, D.C. Well, he was as shocked as I was. I said, I can't understand why I'm going back to Washington. I want to go home with the unit. And so I said, I don't know. You have priority number 3. Well, priority number 3 didn't get you very far. So it's all up to you, you know. No one realizes that when you have orders, and like the Chief Nurses Conference, you get there on your own. Nobody makes any arrangements for travel. I had no arrangements for travel except that I had priority 3 to fly home. That much I had, not by ship. And we didn't have ships going at that time. This was right after the war was over. So I went over to Florence again. We were in Leghorn. And with my orders, I was entitled to get on a plane going back to the United States, not just to Naples or Corsica. And I started off. Well, I was bumped every place we stopped, which was many places. And I'll never forget, right in Florence, we had a nurse who was very defiant, who married an enlisted man, bless them. But you know, this was not right in those days. Now they had a higher priority than I had to get home. She was pregnant. So I can still see her as they got on the plane, and I'm bumped, and she almost thumbed her nose at me and say, "See, you can sit there, but I'm going back to the States." I never was so mad. So anyway, I got off, but then we stopped, I don't know how many places. Well, we got to Newfoundland. Anyway, it took me 3 days and 3 nights to get back to New York, because we were delayed at one place, and then you know, I was bumped again, and then but never any place to go lie down or go to sleep. So I get to Washington, or I mean to New York, and I thought, now what do I do? Now I didn't know New York, but I knew there was a Pennsylvania Railroad station, and I knew that I had to take the train to Washington. I am so tired and so befuddled, and I can, at the top step almost at the Pennsylvania Railroad station, the crowds were just passing and banging and pushing, and well, they pushed me, and I had my suitcase. Of course, there were a lot of people in uniform, so it wasn't the fact that I was in a uniform that, you know, I was pushed around like anybody else. So the suitcase came open.
You had your music.
It dropped on the step, and of course it rolled down 3 or 4 steps, and by that time it flew open, because you know, who thought of locking their suitcase in those days? And all everything I owned for 3 years in the way of clothing was in that suitcase. So everybody kept tramping on it and walking over it, and so I finally gathered up, and I lost a few things. And anyway, I got that all packed up, and I got on the train and went to Washington.
Let's just wait a second while that goes, because I want to ask you something.
Well, anyway, that's out there.
I wanted to ask you, I think you said, you were talking about that you also had a musette bag.
Oh yes, well of course you never moved overseas without a musette bag. Now a musette bag.
What is it? Yeah.
It's a backpack. You know, the kids call it backpack now. It's like a backpack, but that's where you carried all of your personal items, plus your coat hangers. You never moved. Coat hangers were something very scarce to get. We didn't take coat hangers overseas, but somewhere along the 3 years we were there, we gathered up some wire coat hangers, and I'll tell you, they were like a gold brick. Anybody take your coat hanger, you were in deep trouble. So I must have had 6 coat hangers, and that was precious cargo. So I had my coat hangers stuck in my musette bag. They were all sticking out. You knew what they were. They were sticking out because they didn't fit. So I had the coat hangers, and there I am picking up all my duds. I get to Washington.
Nobody helping you.
Oh no.
You said that was just
such a
so
shock.
different.
I thought, geez, we fought this war, you know, to protect the United States, and the people are so rude, and you know, they don't know what it was like. You know, it's just terrible. So I got to Washington at night again, about maybe 10 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock. Now, I'd never been to Washington, but I'd heard of the Mayflower Hotel. So I finally got a cab. I couldn't, you know, all that confusion and noise and horns and everything outside. It was another world. I can't describe the terrible feeling. When I got to the Mayflower Hotel, this taxi, And I walk into the Mayflower, and I remember they must have had some kind of a social function, and I can remember seeing these ladies in their gowns and their jewels and stuff that I hadn't seen for 3 years, and I was in a daze. Of course, I was so tired I didn't know what I was doing. I walked up to the desk and I said, "I'd like a room tonight, please." He said, "Do you have a reservation?" "Oh," I said, "No, I don't have a reservation." And he said, "Oh, we have no space for you." I said, "I've been overseas for 3 years, sleeping in tents in the mud and in the cold. And what am I going to do? I've been up for 3 days and 3 nights getting home. I have to have a room." So he picked up the phone and I heard him say, "I have a hysterical female colonel here. She needs a room." So he hung up and he said, "There's a room for you at such and such place. Some little hotel around the corner from," because he called for the bellboy to come and take my bags, and he carried my bags around to this other little hotel. I can't remember the name of it. But I got there and I cried and I cried and I thought, I can't believe that this is what this United States is all about. And then the next morning to go to the Surgeon General's office, I didn't know how to get there. I didn't even know where it was. And I couldn't understand why all these cars passed me. Why didn't somebody stop and pick me up and take me there? Because overseas, you hitchhike. If you went from your hospital in Rome to see Rome 6 miles away, you hitchhiked, hoping some military transportation, and they all would stop and pick you up, whether it was a truck or a tank or what. You climbed in and you went. Well, I couldn't understand why one of these cars didn't stop and pick me up. It just didn't register. Well, anyway, I got a cab. I'm beginning to wonder where I got the money from to do this. I must have in New York exchanged some script or something to get some money. That is a blank. I have no idea how I got this money for the train and the taxi cabs, but I had it.
I can't. Would you like to kind of summarize a little bit just what it was like for you and the people that you were with in the 3 years that you were over there, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with that.
Summarize it.
Or give me your thoughts on the typical nurse or person that you worked with.
One of dedication and devotion to duty. I must say that. It'd have to be dedication and devotion. That was my objective and motive, and I'm sure that it was the nurses. I think it was the doctors. I think we were all a very dedicated group. They
were all volunteers.
All volunteers, all from the Chicago area. It was the Northwestern University Medical School unit. Devotion, dedication, how else can I sum up our feelings? High morale at first, low morale after 3 years. It's a long haul. Companionship. I don't know of anyone who's ever been in the service and been in a unit. We were a family. We were an absolute family. We fought with each other, I guess, and we stole from each other, and we were just like a great big family. Sometimes we were a happy family, and then sometimes we had a little dissension amongst the family. The camaraderie was so great. And that's why when people get together, even today, 60 years after the war, "Oh, you were in the war, where were you?" And then you start, you see, and this is why, how can you explain that that feeling we all have of the same objective, the same experiences, many of us, that no one will ever understand unless they experience the same thing. So it's really very hard to explain what it's all about. I don't know how else to explain it.
I think that's perfect. Catherine, thank you so much.
You're welcome. How are we going to know whether this thing worked or not?
We'll know in 2 minutes.
Oh, you're going to put it on the thing?
Yeah, I can do that. Or we can even do it right here, probably. But we can put it on the thing, too.